of the digestive tract, and they're going to flip over to page 42 and 44, the discussion of physiology. All right? So, not much digestion goes on in the mouth and the stomach. So this morning, we got through the mouth, the stomach, anatomy, and physiology. The small intestine is where all of our important digestion and absorption takes place. But we require the liver and pancreas components for that to be effective. So I did the anatomy of the small intestine and the liver, but we didn't get to the physiology. Okay, so we'll do about that same aspect today, and then on Thursday we'll pick up the primary physiology and then follow it through the large intestine.
Nice haircut.
Thank you. All right, so looking into the mouth. All right, we'll start out with the lips, and I'm not going to draw anything just yet until we get to the next slide. But remember, we had in the female reproductive system, we had the labia minora and labia majora. Those words mean lips, so we use the same term for the lips of the mouth. And we have the upper and the lower lips, so superior labia and inferior labia. All right, so that's just words for upper and lower lip. Labium would be singular, but as usual, I'm not picky about which one you choose. So if we look at a diagram on a sagittal view, we look at the lip is actually contains the free component of our first sphincter muscle. So what muscle would this be forming the oral sphincter? What's the muscle? If you look at our sagittal section of the head, here's the upper and lower lip, and you can see a muscle right there. Orbicularis oris. Exactly right. So that's the first sphincter of our digestive system, is the orbicularis oris. Anybody remember the cranial nerve that would cause that to close? Facial. Exactly right. So that's a sagittal view. In this image, you're looking at a frontal view. And if the lower lip is pulled down and the upper lip pulled up, you can see a thin membrane attaching the deep surface of the lip to the gum line. And that's the labial frenula, okay, or frenulum for singular. And if that is extensive, it moves down between the teeth, it can cause that gap between the two central incisors, okay, if that's a little bit more inferior or superior in its attachment and formation. Now, we have another frenulum, which is on the inferior aspect of the tongue, all right? And that's from the floor of the oral cavity to the inferior surface of the tongue. If that is too far forward, then it can result in somewhat a big tongue tie. So I'm talking like that just by placing the tip of my tongue behind the bottom of my foot, which is very severe tongue tie. It's not able to move at all. So if we have that frenulum here, the more anterior it is, the less mobility there is to the tip of the tongue, and it makes it more difficult to form words the way we're used to hearing them. Okay? It's very simple surgery to snip that, cauterize it, and free up that tongue surface. So we have those two labial frenula. And a single lingual frenulum. Okay? Now in this view as well, as we look at the roof of the oral cavity, we did this prior when we were talking about the tonsils, but you would have, it's not very straight. We're looking at the soft palate with the uvula. And there are two sets of muscles that come from the soft palate. One comes down to the tongue and forms a fold. The muscle will be deep to that. the two folds together form this arch. So sometimes it can be referred to as the arch, the muscle, or the fold. All right? So we're looking at, I'll move the diagram a little bit, the larger view. So here you're looking, find the tonsil, and then that arch just anterior or fold just anterior to it is formed by the palatoglossal muscle. So from soft palate to tongue. So that becomes the palatoglossal fold, which contains the palatoglossal muscle. And then from the soft palate to the pharynx, we have the palatopharyngeal. Or muscle. And then as we learned with our immune system, the tonsil that's found between those two is the palatine tonsil.
Did you say the pharyngeal arch was from?
So the palatopharyngeal arch and would be the palatopharyngeal muscle. The arches are just the two folds together, create the arches. So you can use those terms interchangeably. All right, so if we look at a sagittal view of the mouth, so can I erase what's on the board now? You guys have that? It's in your diagrams anyway. All right, so if we look at a sagittal view, and that would be the left-hand diagram, then we have several spaces. Remember how in the nasal cavity, we had the vestibule, which was the nostril space, and then we entered into the nasal cavity proper. All right, I'm just going, it's easier for me to draw my lips from this side. And we have the tooth, gum line, tooth. So we have the labia, and then we have this gap between the cheek or the lip and the gum line, and that is the vestibule. So it's not just anterior, but it's all the way around the mouth, all right? So in this view here, it would be between the cheek and the teeth. So you can take your tongue and put it, kind of wrap it around your teeth on the outside, and the tip of your tongue would be in the vestibule. And we have a muscle that contracts the cheeks and compresses the cheeks to keep food from clumping up in the vestibule. Anybody remember what the name of that muscle is? Use it to suck in your cheeks?
Buccinator?
Yes, buccinator or buccinator. Okay, you might have said it earlier and I just didn't understand it. So the buccinator or buccinator compresses the cheeks and compresses the vestibule space. And that's also facial nerve. When my youngest son was little, 2, 3, he would take hours, it seemed, to eat lunch or dinner, especially if it had food that he didn't like. And so he learned to go to the bathroom and spit it out, but before that, he would just hold it in his mouth. He'd be like, honey, that just makes the taste last longer. Why don't you just swallow it? We only asked for 2 or 3 bites of anything that was on his plate. Just chew it and swallow it, and then you can drink some milk or some water, and that taste that you don't like will be gone. No. I'd go in after he'd be in his room napping, and then he'd have a mouthful of peas, and it would have dribbled out onto his pillow. He just had them stuffed into that vestibule space. Like he was holding on to the taste longer.
Stored them for the winter.
Exactly. So again, it would be that space, not between the tongue and the teeth, but between the teeth and the cheeks or the teeth and the lips. All right? Then we have the tongue itself. Well, let's do our hard palate first. So the floor of the nasal cavity and the roof of the mouth is the same structure. The hard palate created by the maxillary bone and palatine bone. And then we would have the soft palate, just like we saw in the previous diagram. The tongue. And so this space would all be oral cavity, all right, where the tongue is actually located, behind or medial to the teeth. And what is this muscle that has its origin off of the hyoid bone and forms the bulk of the tongue? It functions to protrude the tongue. It's this fan-shaped muscle. You can see it right here. I know, I keep bringing up 437. So the bend of the mandible is the genu, and all of our tongue muscles end in glossus. So genioglossus. Genuflect is to bend your knees like you're to kneel down. All right, so the genu is that bend portion. So this would be genioglossus. So that's going to be the major muscle that we would use to move the tongue and push it forward. There's another muscle that comes from the temporal bone and attaches to the posterior aspect of the tongue that we use when we swallow, because this tongue comes from up above and behind the tongue. So it pulls the tongue up and back. That's what you do when you swallow. You push the food up and back. Anybody know the name of the process of the temporal bone that this muscle attaches to? It becomes the first part of the name of this muscle.
Styloid?
Yes, styloglossus. Remember, every tongue muscle ends in glossus. So styloglossus is the one that you're going to use to push the tongue back towards your oral pharynx. And the nerve that innervates tongue muscles. Yes, it does have the word glossal in it.
Hypoglossal.
Hypoglossal nerve. That's cranial nerve 12.
Professor, the styloglossus is a muscle?
Yes, styloglossus is a muscle.
And where is it?
It has its origin from the styloid process of the temporal bone, just medial and anterior to the mastoid process, and it comes down the wall of the pharynx and attaches to the posterior aspect. I can show you on this model right here. This is styloglossus cut. It would come down from the styloid process and comes in via the lateral wall of the mouth and attaches to the posterior upper aspect of the tongue. So when it contracts, it pulls the back of the tongue up and towards the back of the oral cavity. Okay? And that pushes food into the oral pharynx. The hyoglossus is more, well, you can see it on this model here as well. It's a lateral muscle off of the hyoid. It looks like the stabilizer fins of a boat. And it's this muscle right here. So this would be genioglossus, styloglossus, and hyoglossus from hyoid bone. That's where we get hyo to tongue. So it's going to be stabilizer from the back and kind of stabilize it side to side movement. All right. Now let's look at the surface of the tongue. And we have 3 different types of papilla. These are structures. 2 of the 3 will contain taste buds, all right, chemical receptors. The largest form an upside down V, a chevron pattern. They have a raised rim, and I'm just drawing a few of them. So on a sectional view, these are actually down below the surface of the tongue. So we have this raised rim. Like that. And the taste buds, so there's a moat. And the taste buds are found here in the floor of that moat, which means they have to be in solution, soluble, to actually get down into that space. These, sensory perception from these right here, shown in scanning electron microscopy there, are activated by the binding of bitter substances. So if you were to just dip your tongue, the tip of your tongue in a glass of coffee, all right, it wouldn't taste bitter, not until you swallow it. And that's where the bitter components of it bind to chemical receptors around that moat. So this carries bitter sensation. And the nerve that's involved is the glossopharyngeal nerve.
So they're the circumvallate?
Circumvallate. Okay, so those are the largest ones. Scattered throughout the rest of the tongue, the most common ones are filiform. Filiform are needle-like. In humans, they're not as sharp as they might be if you have a cat, so they don't feel rough when somebody licks you. They are shaped, however, more like that. And they're going to be scattered all over the surface of the tongue, like this. We don't really groom ourselves. Well, maybe we do, but not with our tongue. Okay, and they have no taste buds. And the ones that carry most of our taste sensations are fungiform, which means they look like a mushroom. So these rise slightly above the surface. And they have taste buds along the side down here. And while they're scattered all over the tongue, they are more prominent along the border. Like that. Okay? We would find a few scattered back here, but more prominent along the border. And these are for sweet, sour, and salty, primarily in that range. So the tip of the tongue, if you recall from 430, is where we're more likely to find sweet, salty, and sour towards the back. And these are carried by the facial nerve. So facial nerve has a lot of different modalities. Motors of facial, muscles of facial expression. It's sensory to special senses for taste. Goes to the lacrimal gland. And then, as we'll see, it also goes to some of our submandibular glands. All right? What is the nerve that carries pain, touch, and temperature? So you burn your tongue with that bitter coffee. What nerve would you be activating? Trigeminal. Okay. So pain, touch, and temperature is trigeminal. You have a cold sore, burn your tongue. That's all trigeminal. And trigeminal has one other function involving our process of digestion. What's another function of it? Trigeminal sensory for the entire face. So you get a piece of dirt in your eye, you get a toothache, burn your tongue, all of that is trigeminal. But what else does trigeminal do that's necessary for the function of the mouth? No? What's going on in the mouth? First of all, we put in food. So that process is identified as ingestion. What kind of digestion takes place in the mouth? Mechanical digestion. And then, as you'll see, we also do chemical a little bit of enzymatic activity. So what would be the role of the trigeminal nerve in any of those three?
Salivary amylase.
Nope. That's going to be glossopharyngeal. Salivary glands are glossopharyngeal and facial again. Chewing. The third, exactly, the third branch of the trigeminal nerve not only is sensory, but includes a small motor component, not going to a gland, but going to muscles of mastication, which I don't have listed on your sheet. Can I erase the papilla? You guys okay with that? All right. So, trigeminal nerve is going to provide motor innervation to chewing muscles, muscles of mastication. We have four. Two of them share part of the same name. What's the one that sounds like mastication? Masseter. All right, so that's that big, broad, fat one right here that gets really fat when you clench your jaw. And then coming from here, behind the zygomatic arch, attaching to the coronoid process, really broad muscle that tapers down and attaches behind your cheekbone. Put your hand up here and clench your jaw. You'll feel it get thick. Temporalis. The other two are deep behind the jaw, and they go from part of the sphenoid bone to behind the jaw here to the neck of the mandible. It can pull the mandible back, all right? Actually pull the mandible forward or move the mandible from side to side. The first letter is silent. It means its name means wing. Pterygoids? There's medial and lateral, so that's where we get the four. Okay? So those would be our muscles of mastication, innervated by trigeminal nerve. All right, so what do we need to chew our food besides moving the mandible up and down?
Saliva.
Not to chew.
Teeth?
Teeth.
Oh, yeah. And some people eat with no teeth, so.
Well, they gum it, they don't.
Still, I get it.
All right, so let's look at the structure of a typical tooth. You'll notice in this diagram that the tooth is embedded in the alveolar process, the socket of the mandible or the maxilla. And we need that with the presence of the gum line or the gingiva to identify two of the three regions. All right, so this portion of the tooth is covered with enamel. It's one of the hardest substances, if not the hardest substance in the body. But it covers two regions of the tooth. So the tooth is embedded in bone, all right, in an alveolar process. So this would be the alveolar process of the mandible or the maxilla. And that bone is covered with the gum. So this is the gingiva, which is our fancy word for gum. Actually, I need to bring it, let me change its position here. I have it rising up too high in relationship to the rest of my tooth. So when we identify the set of our tooth, that portion covered by enamel that is above the gum line identified as the crown. All right, so you can see that here with the bracket. So enamel is the white material. So that region above the gum line with the enamel on it is the crown. That region with enamel through the gum line is the neck. So you have to, it's easier to identify that when we have these structures. So that would be crown, and this region here would be neck. All right, the rest of the surface of the tooth, what's extending down into our bone, is covered with, I'm running out of colors here, a substance known as cementum. A little bit sticky, but it covers the surface of the root. So this region of the tooth is the root, and this surface is cemented. So if we look at this tooth model, we can see the difference between the enamel and the cementum. So this layer would be the cementum, this surface would be the enamel. But it's difficult to say where the neck would be because we have no gum line. I mean, I could say a proportion of it is probably right about here. All right, but since the gum's not there, it's more difficult to say what the neck region would be. When we look at the content then, we have a pulp cavity, which kind of models the shape of the tooth. There would be a root canal, a pulp cavity, and that would be filled with loose connective tissue and blood vessels. So the pulp cavity is filled with pulp. So deep to the enamel, but not within the pulp cavity, we have a living tissue in contrast to the enamel, and this is known as the dentin. All right, so all of this kind of striated yellow-brown material would be dentin. So on our diagram, the crown is covered with enamel but contains dentin within which is the pulp. The neck is covered with enamel, same thing, we have dentin and pulp. The root is covered with cementum. It has dentin, and we have the root canal with those components. Right? Once the enamel is damaged, our teeth do not replace it. If the enamel is damaged and the caries gets into the dentin, the dentist is going to fill that with an amalgam of sorts, a cavity with a filling in it. If that cavity or dental caries becomes eroded into the pulp cavity where the nerve is exposed, now there is access through the tooth to the body tissue. And that's what a root canal is done. Okay? The nerve is killed, the root canal and the pulp cavity is packed with an antibiotic while a filling, a crown is formed, and then the crown seals all of that off. Why not just pull the tooth? Yes?
Because if you take out the tooth, then the bone will absorb.
Exactly. Without the pressure provided to the bone through the teeth while you were chewing, that stimulates osteoblasts to greater activity or a balanced activity with osteoclast. Without that force of pressure, and gumming isn't sufficient, then the osteoclast activity becomes greater, and in geriatric skulls, you can actually see that this entire alveolar process area has been resorbed to below the level of where their tooth roots would be. And so instead of a jaw that you see like this, it's actually, it can be just a ½ inch of jawline. And that's why it looks like their mouths are sunken in. Okay? So dentures do provide that ability to create pressure, maybe not as much as normal, Dental implants are expensive, but they provide the more normal tooth for us. A dental implant is where they put a screw down into the jawline, and then you have a permanent tooth form attached to that. Okay? Now we look at dentition, and dentition is the pattern of the tooth, of the teeth in the mouth. And we have primary teeth, which are the deciduous teeth. All of these primary teeth have the permanent counterpart to them, so they are returned at the second form. You can have these inside the bone, and as they develop, we'll push the primary teeth out, so we have the same teeth in adult dentition, secondary dentition as we do in primary. Plus, on each side of the mouth, top and bottom, we have 3 additional teeth. So child dentition or deciduous dentition, primary dentition has a total of 20 teeth, 5 in each quadrant. So the teeth that you have on the left side are mirrored by the teeth on the right and by the teeth on the inferior jaw. So I'm going to write those. I'm not going to draw the dentition. We have that up on the screen, but I'll write the teeth in sequence. And it's always best when you're identifying these teeth to start with the central incisor, because you may not have all of the other ones in, and that will throw your count off when you're trying to identify them in sequence. So the ones in black will be the ones that are present in both primary and secondary, and the purple ones are present only in secondary, okay, when I write them on the board. So both primary and secondary are going to have the incisors. So there is a central incisor. There's actually 2, but we're doing just 1/4 of the mouth. And a lateral incisor. These are cutting teeth. So they have the sharp edges. Right. I don't know how many times I've had mine recapped because I kept drinking out of bottles, apparently glass jars or glasses, and chipping. I can still remember when I was about 5 or 6, I had chipped my teeth going to the dentist to have them filed smooth, and then coming home and hearing, we were staying at my aunt's house, and hearing in the bathroom the toilet gurgling. It sounded just like the drill. Yeah, see. After a while, they couldn't drill my teeth down anymore because I kept chipping them, so I got caps, and then the caps would come off. And my dentist would say, well, okay, we can only do this a few more times. And a year ago, about September, you know how you look at glaciers and the whole front of the glacier comes off, or the rock faces in Yosemite? Well, the back of one of my incisors just kind of split. The whole back of my tooth came off.
Oh my God.
And I was like, I didn't do anything. And he was like, that's really a hard shear for. I wasn't even chewing anything that was hard. And so the last time, it was just, okay, we're not going to cap this anymore. He basically just drilled, under anesthesia, took my lower tooth incisor and just made it into a post of dentin, I guess, and then fit a cap over the entire, so the entire, if you look at, put a light behind my mouth, you can see the center white column of real tooth, and then the cap is the entire thing over that. So it's not just kind of a little artificial cap, it's over the entire tooth, and I have this little stub. He just gave up trying to keep capping it. So you can put a lot of pressure on that small surface area, and that contributes to it splitting like that. So we have the central incisor, the lateral incisor. So central to lateral, and then we have the cuspid, which is also known as the canine, because it's the jagged, long, fang type tooth. Some people, it's the same length as everybody else. And my husband, it really does look like a dog tooth. Sometimes eye tooth is another name for it. A little sharper and maybe longer than other teeth. All right. So it has a variety of names. And then this is our first purple tooth. Those are part of both primary and secondary. And as kids get older, these fall out and are replaced by the same type of tooth. But we also add the premolars. These are known as bicuspid, so either term is fine. So the first premolar and second premolar. will be present in secondary or adult dentition, but not in the primary. And that's these teeth right here. Wide here. Then first and second molars are part of primary dentition. These have, along with their premolars, have a more flat surface and are better for grinding. Okay? And then finally, the third adult-only tooth is the third molar. This is the one that is not, sometimes doesn't erupt until the mid-20s or at all. It can be impacted, meaning it's sideways, and can push along the roots of other teeth. So it's really not that difficult to pull a tooth. I had 4 teeth, one on each top and bottom, both sides pulled when I had braces in high school. But I have no third molar, so those never got pulled. So when these other teeth were pulled, I can actually feel a gap. If I run my finger along my jawline, there's a gap there where those teeth used to be, where it never actually completely filled in. But the third molars, if they're impacted, they're still down in the mandible, they have to go in and open up the jaw. And that's a much more invasive and traumatic surgery for the mouth than just grabbing a tooth and pulling it. So I was under general anesthesia for that, just to have those teeth pulled. And I can remember sitting in the dentist chair and they're going through the pre-check, and of course you can't eat before you have general anesthesia, and I was hungry. And I grabbed and eaten just a couple of crumbs of cornbread. And I still remember my mom being furious with me when I said, well, you know, I had a little bit of cornbread. But they went ahead and put me under, and I didn't throw up, so I guess it was okay.
So those are the wisdom.
Those are known as the wisdom teeth, which I guess I'm not very smart. I never had them. All right, so the teeth would be considered an accessory structure because they're part of the process, but food doesn't pass through them. Okay, and then in addition to that, we also have the salivary glands. So salivary glands are found outside the digestive tract, but they send their secretions into the mouth and contribute to either the mechanical or the chemical breakdown. There are 3 sets. Since they are outside the mouth, they utilize ducts to get their secretions into the mouth. So they are a form of an exocrine organ. The largest is found just anterior and in front of the ear. And this is the parotid gland. Its duct passes anterior and over and inserts through the buccinator, so it crosses over the masseter and then pierces the buccinator. It comes into your mouth just opposite your second molar. So sometimes you can feel a little bump right there in your upper jaw cheek. And if you massage it just right, you can get it to squirt saliva out. The things I do when I'm bored in meetings. So this is innervated by glossopharyngeal nerve. It is our primary salivary gland for chemical digestion. So it's going to contain salivary amylase. And we'll come back to this in just a moment when we talk about the physiology of digestion in the mouth. So it's a very watery secretion. Over here on the side, this is a mixed gland. This is actually the submandibular, but all of these purple cells are the serous secreting cells. So it's a watery solution, even though it has this salivary amylase in it. And these are kind of like mulberries. We cut them in half, they look like a pie. Nuclei out to the back, a lot of ribosomes and ribosomal ER. So those are called serous acinar cells. The acinar meaning that pie-shaped appearance. So, serous secretion, right? As the name says, submandibular is deep to the mandible. There's a small, it's kind of J-shaped, So there's a small section that's on the superficial aspect of the mandible, and then it wraps behind and kind of travels along the length of the mandible. So this is submandibular. So let's see. You can see this portion right here kind of on the outside, and then the rest of it's on the inside of the mandible. This is innervated by facial nerve. Are these parasympathetic or sympathetic? Parasympathetic. Part of digestion, parasympathetic activates digestion. And these don't really have enzymes. All right, a little bit, but it's a mixed serous and mucus. So you notice submandibular has an S and an M. So serous and mucus, S comes first. So this is primarily serous. So mostly purple. That center area starts a duct, but we also have mucus. Now we're used to having to have goblet cells secrete mucus, but these are mucus cells right here. And they also tend to look like a little more difficult to see the acinar component, but they are filled with a kind of frothy appearance. And let's see if I can, in our histology review area here, I have some slides of those two.
So the serous acinar cells are the cell type within the parotid gland, or is that
They're
a
in
cell
both.
gland itself?
All right, so here's a view of the parotid gland. So this is a duct up here, the simple columnar epithelium that looks like the collecting duct. These would be the serous secreting cells, all right? The next slide is mixed. So this is submandibular, all right? So we have the serous, and then we have the mucus as well. And then sublingual is almost all mucus. So this gives you a little better view of the mucus secreting, where the whole cell is filled with mucus. But we do see it's some serous, which forms a cap on the outside of these little pie-shaped clusters of mucus components. So that's in the sublingual gland, which is found just under the tongue. It has multiple ducts. So right here, just behind the lower incisors, okay, you would find the sublingual gland. And that also is facial. And it is mucus with those serous stimulants, but primarily mucus. But you'll see these little caps. Which are the serous stimulants. So the submandibular is going to secrete into the floor of the mouth, kind of on the side here, by the first and second premolars, and the sublingual on the floor of the mouth, but just behind the incisors, and the parotid on the lateral aspect of the cheek by the upper second molars. All right, so let's take a moment here and look at the type of chemical digestion that occurs in the mouth. Primarily, it is mechanical. So if you will turn forward, remember combining these two aspects together. So if you'll turn forward to page 42 in your lecture notes. Remember, we reviewed the components of digestion. So in the mouth, our pH is between, it's slightly on the acid side. And here's our three types of food substances: carbohydrate, protein digestion, and lipid digestion. Well, we have two enzymes that are produced by primarily the parotid gland. We see these same enzymes produced by other organs. So we use the prefix term salivary. The two enzymes that are produced by these salivary glands are salivary amylase and salivary lipase. So, as you recall when we did our preview, maybe not, you've been working on your exam. When we look at carbohydrate digestion, we start out with a starch, okay, or a disaccharide, but let's say you're eating a potato. Oh, so, my husband's moving to Colorado at the end of May, and changing jobs, I'll here another year at least. But the company he's working for was in town. I have no idea why. It's a housing company, and they came in to see a women's exhibit. Chicago and Colorado and whatever. I have no idea. Anyway, so they wanted to meet me, so I went to dinner at the Grange. Somebody eaten at the Grange or worked there? Okay, it's supposed to be farm food, but high end. So there was a pre-choice menu. Choose from the appetizers or the salad, and then all of the main entrees were meat, which I don't eat meat. So at the bottom of that, it said, there was another woman there, it said, chef's choice, vegan and vegetarian selections, inquire from a waiter or waitress. So I said, what are these selections? And she said, well, it's chef's choice. So, well, I guess I just get what I get. So everybody orders their stuff, and I get this other woman and I get two different plates. Hers was mushroom risotto with asparagus on top and fava beans and something else. I got two asparagus stems cut up, so there's a little, no more than a quarter of a cup, about the same amount of mushrooms, and about the same amount, maybe 6 pieces of small artichoke, hearts about like that. That was my entree. And I know the idea of the price because it wasn't on the thing, but I was like, everybody else gets to choose their entree, and just because I'm a vegetarian, I don't even get to say what vegetables